So the topic of today's video is one that I've been thinking about a lot, and finally kind of put my thoughts down on paper and decided that today was the day to do it. As the title says, our goal today is to talk about how to make your garden more sustainable. Hello friends, welcome back to Sanctuary Gardens. If this is your first time, then welcome. If this is not your first time, then welcome back. I'm Jolene and this is my garden. There's a lot of fear in the world right now between the beginning of the pandemic and just the world events that are taking place right now. There is a lot of fear when it comes to the sustainability of our food sources, and for good reason. We have had some minor food shortages at least in the United States here. Grocery stores only keep about 3 days inventory of food anyway. So imagine if something were to happen where they can't get their shipments of food, then 3 days later, they're all out. And then you add on to the fact that people suddenly get really fearful and they go and buy all the toilet paper. But that's not the purpose of this video, to feed into that fear. Instead, what I'm hoping to do is to live by that counsel that we are given a spirit, not of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind. And so that's the purpose of today's video, is that I want to empower you to step out of fear and into a sound mind. So when it comes to this topic of how to make your garden more sustainable, it's such a broad topic that there's just so many different aspects of it that I really tried to boil it down to these 7 key principles. And if you can think of another principle that you think should be included in this list, then be sure to comment down below. I will make references to some other videos that I've made, and if you're interested in those videos, I will try to link them all down below in the description, maybe even put up some cards up here. I'm also making a list of the different videos that I'm going to be putting out this year. So if there's one that you particularly want to see that I have not made, then be sure to comment that down below as well. And then click that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our future content. I've also included chapters that I will list down below for your future reference. So let's talk about tip number 1. It seems so simple and you would feel like this is something you know, but it's surprising how many people don't think of this, is to plant things that you will actually eat. I always love telling this story because sometimes because I have a YouTube channel, people assume that I have a green thumb and I never make mistakes, but that's so not the case. The first year that I ever gardened here on this property, I planted 6 cherry tomato plants. And let me tell you what, number 1, that was a lot of cherry tomatoes that we were suddenly having to eat. But you know what? My husband and I don't really love tomatoes in general, but we don't especially like cherry tomatoes. And so I ended up having to ended up tearing out 4 of those cherry tomato plants and just keeping 2 for a couple, salads and stuff. But it was just such a waste of space that, I just didn't think about. To maximize the efficiency and space of your garden, you want to make sure that whatever you're planting is something that you and your family like or will cook a lot. So for our family, we absolutely love peas. And so I always grow snap peas every single year. And then another thing is we pretty much use 1 onion every single day, sometimes more, sometimes less, but we probably average about 1 onion a day in our cooking. And so for me, I prioritize growing onions in my garden because for us, that's going to save us money. So think about your cooking and what do you use a lot of? Look at your grocery list or look at your receipts and see what is something that I buy pretty much every week, and then see if you can plant that. Hey friends, this is Jolene. I'm just editing this video and wanted to insert a quick comment here on this section that yes, I do want to encourage you to grow things that you know your family will eat and that your family likes. But on the other hand, don't be afraid to try new things. That's the beauty of gardening. That's what makes it so enjoyable, is to try new things. And then sometimes you'll come across something that you really enjoy that you never thought you would have if you hadn't tried, something new. So definitely do try new things. But here's the rule of thumb that I try to follow, is to keep those new things that you're not really sure how they're going to do, or even if you're going to like them, minimize that to about 10 to 20% of your total garden space. So yeah, that's my quick tip on this. So just wanted to insert that in there. Not only does this mean that you're using your garden more efficiently, it also means less food waste. Hey Liam, you want to come sit here with me? Come here. Okay, so my son woke up, so let's see how much further I can do this video. Okay, so tip number 2 is to plant long-term storage items. These are items that you can plant now and then store through some, if not all, the winter. Popular ones are winter squash, which you would think, as the name implies, that it is something that grows in the winter. That is not the case. These are squash that grow in the summer, but they're called winter squash because they have a hard rind, and you're able to store them through a lot of the winter. In fact, just the other day, I pulled out one of my big, huge squashes. I think it was called Sweet Autumn or something. It's something new I haven't tried. And some butternut squash, and we just store them in the garage. Popular winter squash is pumpkin. You know, think of that hard rind, and then pumpkins can last a really long time if you just store them in the right conditions. Some other things are the alliums, like your garlic, your onions, your leeks. These are ones that are fantastic for long-term storage. I still have garlic hanging in my kitchen right now that I braided that I'm harvesting on. I have not bought garlic in 2 years. Another popular one is potatoes, and I would definitely recommend making potatoes a priority in your garden because one, most people like potatoes, but two, potatoes are one of those vegetables that have really good calorie to nutrient ratio. They're very filling. And I mean, you think about history-wise, you think about the people in Ireland who lived off of potatoes. And I mean, sometimes people can go without eating much of anything else. So potatoes are a really good staple item. And there's a lot of different things you can do with potatoes. We store ours in the garage once the weather's cooled off in cardboard boxes layered with straw in between. We are still eating the potatoes from last year's harvest, but they are starting to sprout now. Other things that can be stored long-term are a lot of your root vegetables, such as beets and rutabagas and your carrots. And some of these, if you live in a more mild climate, can actually stay in the ground through the winter. I tend to pick mine because we get so much rain that I've noticed they tend to kind of start rotting. But technically, if I mulch it well, I could sometimes get them to stay in the ground through the winter. But these are also ones that you can pull up out of the ground. Usually it's recommended to take the tops off, and they will store a long time. I have to mention things like Brussels sprouts and cabbage and some of those that can just really last a long time in the right condition. And then apples and pears are another one that we store a long time. We put them in our refrigerator. We have an outdoor refrigerator in the garage, and we eat apples for 4 to 6 months usually. Now, this is not a very exhaustive list of items, but these are just ideas of things that maybe prioritize these more in your garden. You make sure that you're having space for some of these items, because these are items that once your growing season is done, they will store. And the more things you can store during your off garden season, the more money you'll save and the less dependent you'll become on our food chain system. It's worth looking up how each item should be stored. Generally speaking though, usually they say cool, dry conditions, but each item does have kind of specifications for the best long-term storage. And so if you're looking at storing any of these items, definitely look up how the best way to store them is. Tip number 3 is to learn how to compost. This is something that I believe everybody who has a garden should learn how to do, because it is the perfect way to turn your food waste from your kitchen and also your yard and garden waste into nutrients for your soil. The benefits of compost in your garden is innumerable. There are so many benefits. The main one being that it adds aeration, it amends your soil, and reduces your need to use pesticides and fertilizers and such, which when you're talking about a more sustainable garden, creating a system where you're reducing your waste and at the same time feeding your garden the nutrients it needs and becoming less dependent on needing fertilizers that you have to buy. I mean, that's the perfect idea of self-sufficiency. As you can see here, we have this system that we set up where we just put these cinder blocks, kind of lined them up. We have 4 different sections with different stages of compost. So this one here is pretty much, it's almost done. The one over there is the one we're adding to, and then the far bed, I think we had some like bigger items that we were just kind of letting it sit there and slowly decompose. And so this is something that has worked well for us. If you're interested in learning more about composting, my husband did do a video on composting basics, and I'll link that down below. I would like to do more videos on composting because it is such a broad topic that there's so much to discuss. If there's something in particular you want to learn more about, definitely leave a comment down below. Okay, so tips number 4 and 5 kind of go together, but I did end up splitting them into 2. So tip number 4 is to learn how to start your plants from seed. Number 1, this is a much cheaper option than to go to a nursery and buy transplants that someone else has started from seed. But the real benefit actually comes more from the fact that you would then become, you're not dependent on what you can find in the store. And when the pandemic hit and everybody started their victory gardens, which was a wonderful thing, I would go to nurseries and there would be like no plants because everyone had just bought the place out. But if you are able to buy seeds ahead of time and start your own seeds, number 1, you can plant a lot more on your budget. And number 2, you're not dependent on what you can find in the store. And there's such a vast variety of things that you can plant that you can't find in the store, such as things that, with special melons and different, cucumbers and things that are like specialty items, and you can find those in seed form, but you can't necessarily find those in your nursery. I know a lot of people feel very daunted by the idea of starting things from seed, and I just want to encourage you that it's worth a shot. Yes, you will make mistakes, not if, but when you make a mistake. I want you to give yourself a lot of grace and just give it a try. Start small. Right now, this is just what I have in my window. I have some other things in my den that is under a grow light. I don't have as many grow lights as I would like, so I end up using my bay window here. I've made mistakes, but you know what? Each year I learn and I get better at it. So tip number 5 is kind of like tip number 4B, because it does go along with tip number 4, which is starting your own seeds. Tip number 5 is to use heirloom seed varieties and to learn how to seed save. To me, this is the epitome of self-sufficiency. Now, if you're confused by what heirloom means, I have a special video that I will link down below, and also a card up here on the difference between hybrid, GMO, organic, and heirloom seeds. So you could definitely check that out. But just a quick rundown, heirlooms are plants that let's say you plant an heirloom seed and you get that plant and then you collect the seed from that plant and you plant it the following year, you're going to get to the exact or pretty darn close to the same plant as the mother plant that you collected the seeds from. So the idea with using heirloom is that you're able to seed save and get plants that you know what they are. If you learn how to seed save, you could technically go your whole lifetime of gardening and never have to buy a seed again. That's why I call this the epitome of self-sufficiency. Because yes, the first year that you do some seed starting, you'll have to buy seeds. And of course, every year I see new things that I want to buy. And so I always end up buying seeds. But if you do learn how to seed save, you can save those seeds and plant them year after year after year. If you take good care of your seeds and you store them in the right conditions, they can last you for years. I haven't done a lot of seed saving in the past. I usually do seed saving on the things that are very easy to seed save, but I would like to learn more. And so my hope is that this will be the year that I learn how to seed save. And so watch for an upcoming video later this summer or maybe early fall on how to do seed saving. I also have a playlist on Seed Starting 101. If that is something you are interested in, I'll be sure to link that down below as well. Tip number 6 is consider buying more perennial plants. This includes things such as your berries, your nut trees, and your fruit trees. Behind me, you can see some of my fruit trees. These are pears and apples. And we were blessed when we bought our property to have these fully mature fruit trees already on the property. I'm guessing they're probably about as old as the house, which is like maybe 40-ish years old, which is amazing. And so we're super blessed. Since we've been here, we have planted a plum tree and 3 nut trees, walnuts and hazelnuts. My son just went through the dog door and is now inside the house. I better go get him. Perennial plants are a bigger investment in the beginning, and they do take sometimes, well, I know with like fruit trees and nut trees, it can take 5 to 10 years sometimes before you start getting fruit off of them. So if you're not going to be staying anywhere for very long, it may not be worth planting perennial plants. But if you plan to stay in an area for a length of time, definitely invest in perennial plants. And the reason is because they're a bigger investment in the beginning, and it might take a while before you get your fruit. But once they get established, they will produce so much, 1,000 times worth the cost that it took to plant them. It's great because it's a cost that you're not having to replant them every year. So once they're fully established and they're producing well, it's free food. They also tend to be large producers. Like these apples and pear trees produce so much that I'm able to do a lot of canning. We make applesauce. I dry a lot of the pears, which is a great way to preserve the harvest. We also have blueberries, raspberries, and strawberries, and we also have a wild blackberry patch. So when summer hits, we are in full force fruit mode. And it's so wonderful because things like strawberries and raspberries can be quite expensive in the store, but we just can walk out here and pick them all the time, and they're so much better. And because I do organic gardening, they're chemical free. So if you have the space and the time, I would definitely consider see what perennial plants you can plant. Last but not least, let's get into tip number 7. Learn how to garden in your off season. For me, my off season is winter. If you live somewhere else, maybe your off season is summer, like if you live in a really hot area. Learning how to garden in your off season extends your season so that you don't have dry spells where you're not getting anything from your garden. Where I live in Washington State, at least on this side of Washington State, in the Pacific Northwest, my winters are fairly mild, and so for me to garden in the winter is actually not too terribly hard, as long as I choose the right crops, which are your cool season crops. And for me, I mostly just mulch around them, and then they usually just stay just fine through the winter. If you live in a colder environment, let's talk about things you can do to extend your season. If you live in a harsh winter, some ways that you can extend your season is maybe consider getting a greenhouse. Sorry, my son is going to take the camera away from me. Come here, bud. Definitely consider getting a greenhouse if you live in a harsher winter climate. But some other things you can do besides that are row covers, cold frames, low tunnels, walls of water. These are ways that you can extend your growing season in harsh winter weather. If you live in an area where you have scorching hot summers, then you would consider how you can utilize shade to your advantage, how mulching can make such a difference. Mulching is absolutely necessary in any climate because it helps with moisture control and such, but especially in those super hot and super cold times of the year. Maybe you learn how to grow indoor in pots, or use shade cloth, or maybe water deeply more frequently. These are ways you can combat that really hot part of your hot summer. I'm fairly new to winter gardening. Where I lived in Idaho before, we had such harsh winters that we didn't grow a whole lot. So I'm trying to expand my knowledge of that. This here is an example of one thing that I had growing through the winter, and this is my Brussels sprouts, which you can see it completely fell over, but I'm still harvesting Brussels sprouts off of it. I would like to learn more about this myself, so maybe I'll do a video on that later this year. I also had a baby last year, and so my garden was definitely not tended to as well as it should have been. So I'm really hoping this year I can be on it and get things in the ground in time before the cold weather hits. All right, so there you have it. This is my 7 steps for a more self-sufficient, sustainable garden. My goal is that by utilizing these steps that I just laid out, that we can become less dependent on the grocery stores and more dependent and feel more empowered in our gardens. This list is by no means comprehensive, so if you feel like I missed something really important, be sure to comment down below. I really do love this community of people. Ever since I started YouTube, I have a lot of people who give their thoughts and advice and their tips as well. It's really, the idea behind gardening is to help edify each other and encourage each other, uplift each other. And I really do find that the gardening community does do that. And that's where we help each other. In times of distress, in times of difficulty, we should band together. We should share seeds with each other. We should give advice, give tips, lend help where needed. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, give it a thumbs up, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well as the bell icon so that you get notifications whenever we have a new video coming out. Because if you give me ideas of videos and topics that you want me to do, I will do my best to do them, and you don't want to miss them. As always, I'm Jolene. I'll see you next time. Go out and grab something. God bless. Right to the tripod every time.